The first sign wasn't silence. It was duplication. A news bulletin played twice in succession on the station feed, the same 15 minutes repeating back to back, without explanation. The anchor's voice didn't change cadence, didn't stumble, didn't acknowledge the loop. Markets closing early in parts of Asia. Rail delays in Europe blamed on labor action. A public health advisory recommending calm and common-sense precautions. Normal words, stacked strangely. I noticed because the system shouldn't have let it happen. Redundancy protocols were designed to fail loudly. This failed quietly. By the time I reached operations, the bulletin had corrected itself, transitioning cleanly into the next scheduled block as if nothing had happened. I made a note anyway. At 7:10 station time, the first scheduled interstation check-in came through with Palmer. Their transmission arrived broken, syllables clipped off unpredictably. "Power's stable here," someone said, voice flattened by compression. "Uplie's good. We're seeing increased military traffic overhead, but no guidance yet." No one commented on the military traffic. It was filed, time-stamped, acknowledged. McMurdo came in 40 minutes late, breathless but joking, blaming ice accumulation on the dish and blaming their comms tech for not catching it sooner. Someone laughed in the background. "Everything's fine here," the voice said. "Just keep an ear open. They're being weird up north." Up north was a flexible term. Everything was north from Antarctica. At breakfast, people lingered longer than usual over the screens. The images weren't alarming, just more of them, from more places, using similar language. Emergency measures described as precautionary. Borders mentioned without context. Sporadic footage of crowds, then immediate cuts back to experts urging patience. No one panicked. We were used to the world behaving badly at a distance. By mid-morning, 3 civilian research flights, scheduled for the following week, were listed as pending review. No reason given. Just the status indicator turning amber instead of green. I asked Jenna in flight coordination if she'd heard anything. She shrugged. Probably customs nonsense. Or disease screening. They're jumpy about that stuff. That word again. Disease. It had started to appear more frequently, sliding into sentences that hadn't needed it before. At 13:20, a message came from a station further inland. Not one of our usual contacts. The transmission wasn't routed through normal channels. It was short. They were locking down non-essential movement and requesting confirmation of evacuation priority tiers. The list attached was incomplete. We answered formally, as required, asked for clarification, requested timeline estimates. An automated acknowledgement came back. No human signature. That evening, the global feed showed a press conference. A health official speaking calmly, carefully, about containment measures. The phrase temporary disruption was used several times. Later, when the power dipped under wind load and the lights flickered, someone joked that even the station was nervous. I smiled automatically. In ops, I replayed the day's recordings. Palmer's voice stuttered at just the wrong moment each time the word quarantine appeared. McMurdo's laughter sounded forced when isolated from context. None of it was enough to prove anything. But it was enough to feel like the world was moving without us. Just fast enough to be difficult to track. That night I dreamed of phones ringing in empty rooms. The second day, somebody finally used the word outbreak. Not on the official channels. Those stayed clean, polished, filtered down to safe phrases like cluster and localized event. It slipped out over a sideband call from a technician I only knew by US name and call sign. "You seeing any of this down there?" he asked. "They're spinning it like it's under control, but—" Static chewed his words, spat them back in chunks. "Entire neighborhoods, cordons, nobody allowed in or out. They're saying it's temporary, but the numbers don't line up." I asked him what numbers. He didn't answer right away. The silence hissed, thick and raw. "Hospital intakes," he said finally. "Transport manifests. There's no way they're just dealing with complications from a seasonal strain. Not with this much military around. Not with this much pressure." "Pressure from who?" He laughed, a sharp, flat sound that didn't fit his voice. "Does it matter?" The call cut out mid-sentence. When I tried to route back through the same path, the system returned a generic error, like the connection had never existed. I logged the contact with the others. My name is Adam, by the way. People kept calling me Systems, like it was my title, like I'd been installed here with the equipment. On the roster, it still said Adam Cole, Systems Integration and Comms. The station commander, Shu, read the log 3 hours later and didn't say anything for a long time. Her thumb tapped the edge of the console, a small sound in the larger quiet. "Unofficial contact?" she asked. "Routing suggests so," I said. "Someone piggybacking on a maintenance band. It wasn't scheduled." She exhaled slowly. "We don't act on unofficial contacts. We note them and wait for verification." "Waiting is what we're best at," I said, then wished I hadn't. Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Keep recording everything. If it escalates, we'll need a pattern, not a feeling." That was always the line here. Feelings weren't actionable. Patterns were. By afternoon, a pattern had started to take shape, whether I wanted it or not. Evacuation priority lists circulated through the network, each one slightly different. Some were stamped as drafts, others as final provisional. Our station appeared on every version, never near the top, never near the bottom. Middle tier, stable, low population, high strategic value. Antarctica was useful for climate, for remote sensing, for proving to donors that science still mattered. On paper, we were always going to be worth saving. The people topside just had to remember we existed. At 1500, we received a consolidated directive marked urgent from a regional coordination center. It acknowledged reports of civil unrest and health infrastructure stress, advised all remote installations to review emergency procedures, and requested confirmation of essential personnel counts. No mention of the word outbreak. No mention of border closures now trending constantly on the news loop. "Feels like they're leaning toward pulling us early," Jenna said, reading over my shoulder. Her breath fogged slightly in the cooler air of ops. "We might get a bonus flight out of this." "Excited to go home?" I asked. She hesitated. "Excited to know there's still a home to go to." We pushed updated personnel numbers back up the chain. 31 souls, broken down by specialty. Shu added a note asking for clarification of timelines, contingencies, and whether medical screening protocols were being updated at transit hubs. The acknowledgement came back 8 minutes later. Automated. Again. No concrete answers. Just assurances that our safety is a priority, and further information will be distributed as it becomes available. By evening, rumors spread faster than the official bulletins. Someone said their brother in Santiago had texted that the military was on the streets, ordering people indoors. Someone else said an aunt in Perth had mentioned hospitals overflowing with panic cases, people convinced they were ill, even when they weren't. Maybe it's just the flu and fear, one of the glaciologists said at dinner. Fear spreads faster than anything. That's comforting, someone else muttered. I mostly listened. On the screens overhead, the news anchor maintained the same practiced calm. Maps appeared behind him with shaded regions, color-coded for advisories, travel disruptions, and temporary emergency measures. The colors deepened over time. Lines thickened. Text crawled faster at the bottom. Airports slowed. Trains slowed. Borders hardened. It was like watching ice form from the outside in. The third time he mentioned isolated incidents of violence related to misinformation, Shu reached up and turned the sound off. We don't need to mainline this, she said. It doesn't change what we do. What do we do? Someone asked. Exactly what we're doing now, she said. Maintain operations. Maintain records. We're not in the problem. We're just observing the waveform. That was the thing about Antarctica. We were always outside the problem, until we weren't. Later, alone in ops during the night shift, I replayed the day's transmissions again. This time I stopped scrubbing and let the raw noise soak in. Under the official messages were other calls, shorter, more ragged, some cut off in the middle. Repeat. Do not attempt. Containment. No longer. This isn't what they said it was. Fragments. Half-words. Emotion punching through where language failed. Someone, somewhere, was trying very hard to be heard outside of the channels they were supposed to use. Someone else, somewhere else, was trying just as hard to shut them up. A request for technical clarification came through at 2:14 from a northern relay node. No names attached, only an ID string and a list of questions about satellite latency and alternate routing options. At the bottom, there was a single line that didn't match the rest. If primary centers go dark, are you able to maintain limited independent contact with field units? I stared at that question for a long time. Then I answered carefully. Yes, under certain conditions. Please specify anticipated failure modes and priority sectors. No reply came. In the morning, the global news feed skipped an hour. There was no gap in the schedule, no apology. The 15-minute loop at 6 o'clock repeated again at 7 o'clock, with identical transitions, as if no time had passed. We only knew anything had changed because the satellite log insisted there should have been new data. When the 8 o'clock block finally arrived, the anchor's tie was a different color, and the map behind him had more red on it. The word pandemic was used once, in a prepared statement, then quickly buried under promises of decisive intervention and global cooperation. Sue watched it silently, arms folded. "This is still early," she said. "They say pandemic and under control in the same breath. That never holds." "Maybe they'll get lucky," I said. "Maybe we will," she replied, "if they're still thinking about us when the dust settles." Outside, the sky had turned the particular flat gray that meant a storm was coming, a wall of weather marching in from nowhere to erase what little horizon we had. Inside, the data kept flowing. Not silence. Not yet. Just more voices speaking over each other, trying to decide what story to tell while the facts outran the narrative. I made more notes. I traced more lines. If there was a pattern forming, it was still hiding under noise. But the station had taught me patience, and patterns always came eventually. All you had to do was outlast the distraction. By the third day, the delays had started to stack. Not catastrophically, not in ways that demanded alarms, just enough that every system needed a little more attention than it had the day before. A server handshake that took 3 attempts, a satellite pass that arrived 3 minutes late and left 2 minutes early, automated reports that flagged inconclusive instead of nominal and offered no explanation. The station still worked. That was the problem. Things rarely broke all at once. They thinned, like ice under current, until you were standing somewhere solid that suddenly wasn't. At 8:30, Palmer Station checked in again. Their voice was different this time. Same speaker, but flatter, as if he'd already said the same thing to too many people who weren't listening. "We've been advised to restrict non-essential movement, effective immediately," he said. "That includes exterior work, unless mission critical. Medical has been instructed to treat all respiratory symptoms as high risk until further notice." "Who advised you?" Shu asked. There was a pause long enough to be uncomfortable. "Multiple sources," he said carefully. "No single authority seems eager to put their name on it." McMurdo followed an hour later. Their transmission was rushed, clipped. "Lost 2 scheduled flights northbound," the operator said. "No replacement timeline. Cargo's backing up on the ice. We've got people asking questions we don't have answers for." "Any mention of evacuation sequencing?" Shu asked. Another pause. "They're saying not to use that word yet." Of course they were. I listened from ops, hands folded, feeling the shape of the problem shifting. Every message brought more data, but less certainty. No one wanted to be first to say things were bad enough to warrant irreversible decisions. That hesitation was familiar. I'd seen it in simulations, in planning meetings, in every post-mortem report I'd ever read. Systems didn't fail because no one noticed. They failed because everyone noticed at the same time and waited for someone else to speak first. At 10:12, a civilian band lit up with an open call. Unscheduled, unencrypted. The voice on the other end sounded young, breathing hard, definitely not trained for broadcast. This is Keller Station," he said, words tumbling. We're requesting guidance. We've had 3 confirmed cases presenting with extreme agitation and neurological symptoms following. He swallowed audibly. Following exposure. We're out of sedatives. Meds sealed off 2 bays. But we need... The call cut off mid-syllable. No automated response followed. No request for clarification. Just the hiss of dead air reclaiming the frequency. Someone swore quietly behind me. I pulled the logs, replayed the last 5 seconds. The word exposure caught on a burst of interference, stretched and warped, but unmistakable. What kind of exposure? Jenna asked, appearing beside my console. I don't know, I said, but it wasn't respiratory. She frowned. How can you tell? Because they would have said that first. At lunch, conversation fractured into smaller groups. People leaned in close, voices low. Officially, everything was still procedural. Unofficially, the tone had shifted. No more jokes about flights home. No speculation about bonus leave. Instead, people asked quiet logistical questions. What happens if the next resupply is delayed? How long can the generators run at reduced load? What's the minimum crew needed to keep the station alive through winter? No one asked how long we could last. That question hung unspoken, like a weight everyone pretended not to feel yet. At 1400, a briefing came in from a health authority I didn't recognize. The logo looked right, close enough to pass without scrutiny, but the metadata was thin. They described a disease with atypical progression, emphasizing that it spread primarily through close contact with symptomatic individuals. The recommended response included isolation, restraint if necessary, and avoidance of physical confrontation. That phrase didn't belong in a medical advisory. I flagged it. Shu read the briefing twice, then once more, aloud. Restraint? Someone echoed. Like violent patients? No, the medic said immediately. That's standard language for delirium management. But he didn't sound convinced. As if to underline the point, another transmission came through 30 minutes later. This one was recorded, not live. The quality was poor, video jittering between frames. A doctor stood in what looked like an emergency ward. Bodies moved behind her, not entirely under their own control. She spoke quickly, sweat darkening her collar. Loss of higher cognitive function appears rapid, she said. Patients exhibit extreme aggression, hyperreactivity to auditory stimuli, and... A crash interrupted her. She flinched, looked away. We're being told to hold. Do not attempt transfers. If you're receiving this... The feed froze. The official explanation that followed blamed a corrupted uplink. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't complete. That evening, Shu convened a station-wide meeting. No screens, no feeds, just us, standing in a room that suddenly felt too large. We don't have enough information, she said plainly. Anyone telling you they do is speculating. What we do know is that transport is slowing, messaging is degrading, and medical guidance is inconsistent. She paused, making eye contact with each of us in turn. We will not panic. We will conserve. We will document everything. If evacuation orders come, we'll be ready. If they don't, we'll still be ready. For what? She didn't say. Afterward, I stayed late in ops, scanning the noise for intent. Around midnight, a personal call slipped through. Not a broadcast, not routed officially. It was a woman from Punta Arenas. I recognized the accent instantly. "My sister works port security," she said. "I don't know how long this line will stay open. They're locking the docks. Ships aren't leaving. People tried to force one this morning. It ended badly." "How badly?" I asked. She hesitated. "I heard shouting on her end, muffled, far away. They didn't stop moving even after—" She cut herself off. "Listen to me. If you hear anything about islands, routes, places still holding, write it down. We're being fed lies. I need to know where the truth leaks out." The line went dead before I could answer. Outside, the storm arrived without drama. Snow erased what little sense of direction the horizon provided. The station pressed inward, lights glowing against the white, like a handful of stubborn embers. We were still connected. We were still informed. But the voices coming through were no longer coordinated, and no one was correcting them any more. That was the shift, not collapse. Just the quiet understanding that the map we'd been following no longer matched the terrain. Sleep became inefficient, not shorter, just thinner. I drifted instead of resting, half aware of the station's rhythms, even with my eyes closed. A compressor cycling somewhere deep in the structure, the wind changing pitch as it found new edges to worry at. The low electrical hum that meant power was still clean. When I woke, it took longer than usual to remember why that mattered. At 5:58, before the scheduled morning checks, the emergency band opened on its own. That should have been impossible. Manual initiation only, two-factor confirmation, red tape layered thick enough that even bad software updates couldn't stumble into it by accident. Yet there it was, open, crackling, alive. The first voice was shouting, not screaming in fear, shouting over something loud and close, like metal being struck repeatedly. "This is not repeat. This is not a drill," the man barked. "We've lost containment in Ward SC. They're not responding to sedation. Securities—" A wet sound cut through his words, followed by someone else yelling incoherently. "Jesus! Lock it! Lock it now!" The transmission cut. It did not resolve into static. It stayed open. For a few seconds, all we heard was breathing. Ragged, uneven, too close to the mic. Then a woman's voice, quieter, shaking. "If anyone's receiving this, if you haven't seen it yet, don't let them get close. Don't try to hold them down. They don't stop when they should. They don't—" A scream tore through the channel, sharp and brief. Then nothing. The band sealed itself with a procedural tone, like a door closing politely. I stared at the console, hands hovering uselessly over controls that no longer mattered. By the time Hashu reached ops, half the station was already awake. No one asked what they'd heard. They didn't need to. The question in every face was the same. Is that real? Yes, she said, because leadership sometimes meant cutting off hope before it metastasized. It was real. And no, we don't know where it came from. The emergency feed replayed automatically 3 minutes later. Same fragment, same ending. No coordinates, no identifiers, just a human voice failing in real time. Medical locked down immediately after that. Not because anyone had told them to, but because procedure had finally been outrun by instinct. Exterior movement was restricted further. Non-essential gatherings were postponed indefinitely. No one argued. At 9 o'clock, the global news feed resumed, as if nothing had changed. The anchor spoke with grave concern about disturbing footage circulating online, assured viewers that misinformation was spreading faster than the illness, and emphasized that violence was being exaggerated. Behind him, the map had shifted again. More red, less context. A crawl at the bottom mentioned disruptions to satellite infrastructure in select regions. That was new. At 10:22, McMurdo's line went dead mid-transmission. Not static, just absence. The kind that indicated deliberate shutdown, not failure. Their signal dropped cleanly, like a switch thrown with purpose. Palmer followed 38 minutes later, their last message truncated but intact. "We've been advised to prepare for the possibility that no flights are coming," the operator said. "If you hear anything different, please." Gone. The room was quiet when it happened, everyone watching the consoles together, no one pretending to be busy. "Does that mean they're gone?" someone asked softly. "No," I said automatically. "It just means they're not talking anymore." That distinction mattered, even if it brought no comfort. Early afternoon brought another unusual transmission. This one filtered through multiple relays, degraded to near unintelligibility. It was recorded, not live, and it looped every hour. A man stood against a wall, streaked with something dark. He wore fatigues without insignia. His eyes were red, not from crying, but from strain. "If you can hear this," he said, voice controlled with visible effort, "then you're still in a place that thinks it's outside the problem. You're not." He glanced off camera briefly, jaw tightening. "Whatever this is, it changes people fast. Don't bring anyone in unless you can isolate them completely. I don't care who they are. I don't care what they promise." A shout echoed behind him. He flinched. "Burn what you can't contain," he finished, and the feed ended. No official response followed. No clarification. No attempt to walk it back. By evening, even the optimists had stopped pretending this would pass cleanly. People moved with purpose now, checking supplies without being asked, reviewing procedures that had felt theoretical for years. Someone put tape over a ventilation junction in a storage hallway, just in case. No one removed it. I reviewed the external flight schedules out of habit. Everything after today was marked indefinite. No cancellations, no confirmations, just the same word, repeated with bureaucratic cruelty. At 1847, radar lit up with an inbound track from the north. Too fast, too low, too direct. I stared at it for a long time, before saying anything. "Shoo," I said quietly. "We've got company." She leaned over my shoulder, eyes narrowing. "Scheduled." "No," I said, "and if it keeps that vector, it's not asking." The mark crept closer, steady and stubborn, ignoring protocols that assumed a world still capable of answering. No one smiled. No one cheered. Whatever was coming, it was not a rescue. It was just one more piece of a world that had finally decided we were part of it. The weapons locker was not where people expected it to be. It wasn't mounted dramatically near the entrance or marked with red paint and authority. It sat behind a reinforced maintenance door off one of the older service corridors, labeled with a dull plaque that read, "Emergency Equipment. Authorized access only." Most of the staff had walked past it for years, without wondering what qualified as an emergency worth opening it. Shu keyed it open without ceremony. Inside were 5 long cases, foam-lined, each tagged and logged, 2 bolt-action rifles built for extreme cold, a pair of compact semi-automatics rated to cycle reliably below freezing, and a battered signal launcher capable of firing flares or solid emergency rounds. No handguns, no automatic weapons, no fantasy. Every piece had paperwork older than half the people standing there. "This isn't for heroics," Shu said, voice steady but flat. "This is for controlled access and last resort containment. Nobody fires unless ordered. Nobody fires unless the line is already crossed." "And if the line crosses us?" someone asked. She met his eyes. "Then we don't miss." That landed harder than a speech ever could. I helped inventory the ammunition. The numbers were small, intentionally so. Whoever had authorized these weapons decades ago had understood something basic about people under stress. You didn't give them more than they needed to make a careful decision. Training happened fast, ugly, and quiet. We went over fundamentals in the cargo bay, muzzle discipline, clear lines, what recoil felt like with adrenaline in your bloodstream and gloves numbing your fingers, what a confined space does to sound. I fired exactly 3 rounds into a containment drum lined with ice-packed insulation. The noise hit like a hammer. The first thing I noticed wasn't the kick. It was how completely disorienting the echo was. The sound didn't travel outward. It came back at you, bounced, multiplied. The second shot hurt my teeth. The third made the world briefly go flat and muffled. I lowered the rifle and understood immediately why panic was dangerous with guns. No one wanted more practice after that. We weren't soldiers. We were people trying to adapt tools to a situation that had never been meant for us. Radar contact stabilized 20 minutes later. The aircraft made no attempt to identify itself. No IFF. No pre-landing exchange. It flew like something that had already decided where it was going and lacked the fuel or patience to reconsider. They didn't taxi properly. The landing was brutal, angled, ice tearing at the undercarriage hard enough that one of the smaller service vehicles rocked in sympathy. When the engines finally cut, the silence felt thicker than before. The hatch opened slowly. People emerged hesitantly, blinking against the light, wrapped in layers that didn't match any uniform or protocol. Faces were hollowed by exhaustion. One man sank to his knees immediately and didn't get up. Weapons stayed lowered. That mattered. Shu kept us back behind the barricade line, rifles present but not threatening, muzzles angled down, fingers indexed properly. The station cameras recorded everything. A woman stumbled forward, hands raised automatically. "We're not military," she said. Her voice was hoarse, but sane. "We're just What's left? We heard this place was still answering." "How many?" Sue asked. 12, she said, then corrected herself. 11. One's hurt. Bad. That word again. Hurt. Medical procedures kicked in smoothly at first. Quarantine protocols were followed properly. Isolation bays sealed, air scrubbers running, no contact without protective gear. It almost worked. The infected man didn't arrive screaming or thrashing. He arrived sedated, strapped too tightly, eyes rolling under half-closed lids, bite hidden beneath makeshift bandaging. No one wanted to peel it back yet. We learned quickly what that mistake cost. He woke during transfer. Not violently at first, just wrong. Muscles tightening in ways sedation shouldn't allow. A sound emerging from his throat that wasn't language, but wasn't random either. When he broke free, it wasn't dramatic. It was efficient. The first nurse didn't even have time to scream. Her arm went first, teeth tearing through muscle with mechanical certainty. Blood sprayed hot against cold surfaces, steam blooming in the air as she fell. Someone fired too soon. The round punched into the wall. Ricochet screaming. And suddenly, training mattered. "Hold fire!" Shu shouted. "Clear lanes." The infected man took 2 steps before the second shot landed exactly where it needed to. Center mass, through bone, into something that didn't register pain. He didn't stop. The 3rd shot shattered his collarbone. The 4th took out his knee. He collapsed, still clawing, jaw snapping, until someone stepped forward and ended it with a round through the skull at point-blank range. No cheers, no relief, just ringing ears, blood on the floor, and one person sobbing uncontrollably behind a sealed visor. The station went silent after that, not electronically, but emotionally. Weapons were cleaned immediately. Ammo counts reconciled. One rifle was returned unused, because sometimes discipline showed itself in restraint. We had contained it. Barely. And now, the survivors began to talk. They told us how the world didn't fall. It unraveled. Cities choking on indecision. Soldiers abandoning posts not because they were cowards, but because no one told them what came next. Islands that held because water bought time. And finally, they told us about a place south of the chaos, a radio signal that kept repeating, an island that still enforced rules, still counted people, still shut its gates. For the first time since the noise began, direction appeared. Not hope, but somewhere to walk toward. They didn't seal the corridor immediately. That was the first mistake, not because anyone panicked or froze, but because the protocols hadn't caught up to what they'd just seen. The infected man was down, motionless, neurologically destroyed beyond question. The threat, as far as training went, was neutralized. The nurse, Elena, was still breathing. She sat slumped against the wall of the medical bay, visor fogged, her left arm wrapped tight with pressure, dressing already darkening through. Someone had applied a tourniquet high and fast, textbook perfect. She was pale but lucid. "I'm okay," she said, voice steady enough to sound like a lie. It didn't get deep. No one argued with her. We wanted that to be true. Medical moved her into isolation, not because they thought she was infected, but because they couldn't afford to guess. Blood loss protocol, shock prevention, sedation withheld for now so they could monitor neurological response. The corridor stayed open another 12 minutes. 12 minutes of airflow, 12 minutes of assumption. Later, when we replayed the footage, you could almost see the moment the station crossed a line it wouldn't recross. Elna deteriorated slowly. That was worse. At first it was tremor, fine motor shaking in her hand that she joked about between clenched teeth. Then slurred speech, subtle enough that someone blamed painkillers she hadn't been given. Her pupils stopped matching size around the 40-minute mark. The medic noticed it and didn't say anything at first, because naming a thing gives it weight, and everyone was already carrying too much. At 63 minutes post-bite, she tried to stand, not urgently, not violently, just with the faint irritation of someone who believed they'd been sitting long enough. "Stay down," someone said gently. She didn't seem to hear it. Her hand missed the railing twice before gripping it too hard, fingers digging in with strength that didn't match her frame. When she straightened, the way her body moved was misaligned, like muscle groups had forgotten how to negotiate with each other. Her jaw trembled. Blood leaked from her nose, dark and thick. "I don't feel right," she said. Those were her last words that were still hers. The change after that wasn't dramatic. No scream, no thrashing. Her eyes fixed on the nearest sound. Not a person, just the rustle of fabric as someone shifted their weight. Her head turned with mechanical precision. Someone reached for her, instinctively. That mistake cost them 2 fingers and most of a forearm. The sound she made when she bit down wasn't rage. It was focus. Containment. The second time was worse because there was no surprise left. The rifle barked once in the confined space, the echo monstrous, painful. The round tore through her chest, but she kept moving, slower now, awkward, but still advancing. Another shot took her leg. She fell hard, skull cracking against the floor. She tried to crawl. When Shu fired the final round, point blank, it wasn't anger or fear that moved her finger. It was mercy. Silence fell afterward, deeper than before. This time, the corridor sealed immediately. No debate. No hesitation. They burned the bay. Not the whole wing. Just enough. Oxygen scrubbers choked the air until the flames starved. Equipment melted into shapes no one wanted to name. The smell lingered anyway. After that, the weapons weren't theoretical anymore. Neither was the infection. The survivors watched all of this from behind glass, faces hollow, guilt stamped deep into their expressions. They didn't need to explain what this meant. We already understood. The nurse hadn't turned instantly. She'd turned inevitably, which meant time wasn't safety. Only distance was. That night, for the first time, someone asked the question out loud that had been stalking the station for days. How long until winter locks us in completely? No one answered immediately. I checked the calendar. Then I told the truth. The man with the ruined arm was named Tomasz. He hadn't screamed when it happened, not at first. Shock had taken him somewhere quiet and far away, eyes unfocused, while Elena was still moving across the floor. By the time we dragged him clear and sealed the bay, his sleeve was gone, and so was most of what had been underneath it. Bite marks don't look the way people expect. They're not neat, not symmetrical. They're torn, skin peeled back unevenly, muscle chewed rather than cut, saliva sunk deep into tissue that was never meant to be open to air. Everyone could see it. No one pretended otherwise. Medical didn't waste time with reassurance this time. They wrapped the arm high, heavy pressure, tourniquet biting down, until the skin below it purpled. Tomasz stayed conscious through all of it, face tight, jaw locked, like he'd decided pain was a currency he didn't want to spend yet. "How long?" he asked quietly, once we were sealed into isolation. No one answered immediately, not because we didn't know, but because knowing had changed. "We don't have enough data," the medic finally said. "We've seen progression from under an hour to several hours, possibly longer." "That's a lie," Tomasz said calmly. Silence. The medic swallowed. "We don't know how long you stay. You." Tomasz nodded, as if he'd expected that answer all along. "Then you isolate me," he said. "You don't wait. You don't guess." Shu authorized Level 5 containment without discussion. That decision mattered. Level 5 meant full physical isolation, sealed airflow, armed oversight, no attempted limb removal. Amputation was discussed for exactly 90 seconds. It died on the table for the same reason everything else was dying. No margin for error. Nobody could say how fast the infection spread systemically. Nobody could say it wouldn't already be past the cut. Nobody wanted to be the one who gambled with the station. Tomasz understood that too. "I don't want to wake up wrong," he said later, voice barely audible through the intercom. "If it starts, you don't hesitate." Someone told him they would stay with him. Someone else promised he wouldn't be alone. Both promises turned out to be lies. The change came slower than Elena's. That was worse. Over 3 hours, Tomasz's vitals drifted out of alignment. Heart rate spiked without stimulus. Pupils dilated and failed to contract fully. Muscle tension climbed steadily, like his body was bracing for something his mind hadn't been told about yet. He stayed lucid long enough to ask for water, long enough to thank the medic, long enough to say one thing that stuck with me more than the violence ever would. "It's not rage," he said. "It feels like narrowing, like everything unnecessary is being stripped away." 20 minutes later, he stopped responding to his name. Protocol triggered automatically this time. No argument, no shouting. The rifle was already there when the first convulsion bent his spine into something unnatural. The round ended it before the transformation could finish. No one looked away. We logged it properly. 2 infected, 2 terminations, 0 ambiguity left. After that, there were no more debates about if, only when. The whiteboard outside medical had once held shift rotations and maintenance reminders. Now it held a list. Names, times, Notes written in thick marker so no one could claim they hadn't seen them. Exposure, progression, termination. Nothing else went on that board. The survivors from the plane sat together in the observation room, separated from the main station by glass and protocol. They were quieter now. Whatever hope had carried them through the flight had burned off in the heat of what they'd seen. This wasn't rumor. This wasn't footage on a screen. This was consequence, measured in meters and minutes. Shu met with them in small groups, never all at once. Not interrogation. Assessment. Who they'd been before, where they'd come from, what they'd seen. Each story overlapped the next, just enough to form a picture that no official briefing had been willing to draw. Cities didn't fall in waves. They thinned. Hospitals first, then supply chains, then trust. One man described a checkpoint outside Cordoba where soldiers had held their line for 2 days after command went dark, refusing everyone entry until the infected among a group of civilians forced the issue. Another talked about a cargo vessel drifting off Valparaiso. Lights still on. Radio repeating the same automated message long after anyone aboard could have answered a call. They didn't turn immediately, the woman from the tarmac said, again and again, as if repetition might change the truth. That's what killed people. They waited. Everyone waited. The phrase lodged in my head. Everyone waited. Radio traffic trickled in throughout the day. Less structured now. More human. Individuals breaking protocol to warn anyone still listening. Short-range broadcasts advertising local strongholds that vanished from the band days later. Coordinates scrawled over bad signal. Impossible to verify before they went quiet. Late afternoon, I caught something different. A structured transmission. It came in clean enough to stand out immediately. Not because it was strong, but because it was steady. Same format, same cadence. Repeating every 6 hours on a narrow band that hadn't been used for civilian traffic before. A man's voice, clipped and careful. This is Puerto Deseado Auxiliary. If you are hearing this, you are outside the primary containment zones. We are receiving limited arrivals. No walk-ins. Maritime or air access only. Quarantine enforced without exception. Behind the words, I could hear movement. Life constrained, but deliberate. We are not accepting infected individuals. We will not reconsider once contact is made. If you cannot comply, do not approach. No optimism, no promise of rescue, just rules. I replayed it 3 times, verifying timestamps, triangulating drift, southern South America, an island used for fisheries and weather monitoring before any of this started. Remote enough to limit approach vectors, warm enough to sustain agriculture, still talking. I didn't announce it immediately. Not yet. Because once you introduced direction, staying became a choice instead of default. And choices killed people. That night, one of the survivors tried to leave quarantine early. He didn't understand why the rules had changed so fast, why kindness had been replaced by distance. He pushed when the door didn't open, shouted when no one answered, threw himself against the glass hard enough to split the seal. He wasn't infected. That was the worst part. Protocol demanded isolation anyway. Airflow shut down. Armed response stationed without discussion. The man slid down the wall, sobbing, anger bleeding into exhaustion. No one went to comfort him, because everyone could see how easily that could turn into something else. We were still alive, still organized, but the station had stopped feeling like a place that waited for instruction. It had become a place that weighed outcomes, and winter was coming. No one officially proposed departure. That was the odd thing about it. There was no meeting called to decide, no vote held, hands raised, arguments recorded. The idea arrived the way rot does, invisibly at first, then suddenly everywhere. It started with inventory. People asked sharper questions now. Not how much do we have, but how much can we carry? Not how long will this last, but what do we abandon first? Numbers shifted on spreadsheets that hadn't been designed for movement. Fuel logs changed color. Aviation kerosene was no longer a static resource. It became distance. Generator reserves became days. Medical supplies stopped being replenishment metrics and started looking like lifespans. The station still worked, but it had begun to feel permanent in the wrong way, like a tomb that powered itself. I finally brought the radio transmission to Shu on the second night after Tomasz. She listened without interrupting, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the waveform, more than the words. When it finished looping, she didn't ask me where it came from. "Is it real?" she asked instead. "Yes," I said, "or at least consistent. Same voice, same cadence, same signal drift. If it's a lie, it's one that's paying attention." She nodded slowly. "And if we go?" "We don't come back," I said. "Winter closes our last margin in 16 days. After that, anything that breaks stays broken." Shu turned the volume down, but didn't mute it. "I won't order it," she said. "I won't pretend this is still a station decision." "It's already not," I replied. She looked at me then, properly, not like an administrator evaluating data. "How many?" I didn't need to check. "Enough to matter," I said. "Not enough to take everyone." That was the truth no one wanted to say aloud yet. Leaving required skill sets that didn't map cleanly to rank or seniority. Navigation, mechanical tolerance, stress discipline. People who could operate with missing pieces and make decisions without permission. People who could pull a trigger if they had to, and live with it afterward. By morning, the quiet math had spread. Some people withdrew without being asked, bodies curling inward as if already shrinking away from the future. Others leaned forward, volunteering for things that no longer sounded theoretical. There were no speeches, only lists. I watched the roster reshape itself organically, names migrating from support to essential movement, from core to station sustainment. Some tried to argue their way onto the transport team. Others asked not to be included and didn't explain why. Shu didn't override anything unless she had to. That restraint cost her sleep. At noon, we lost our last official connection. The global feed froze on a frame of an anchor mid-sentence, mouth open around a word that would never finish. Behind him, the map glowed redder than anything I'd seen before. The feed didn't cut to static. It just stayed. We shut it off manually. Outside, The wind dropped. The silence that followed felt deliberate, like the world holding its breath. The survivors from the plane were integrated by default now. They knew what travel looked like outside of theory. They knew which roads became traps, which harbors turned into graves. They were also expendable, which no one said outright, but everyone understood. 2 days later, one of the glaciologists vanished. No breach alarms, no open doors, no signs of struggle, just absence. We found her suit near the outer perimeter, neatly placed, gloves inside, radio clipped but silent. She hadn't left a note. No one went out after her. Not because we didn't care, but because chasing grief in Antarctica had never ended well. That night, the radio signal from Puerto Deseado repeated again, steady, patient, still there. I sat alone in ops, listening to it loop, imagining the island not as salvation, but as friction, something solid enough to stop the slide. The group that would leave had mostly taken shape now. Not heroes, not the strongest, just the ones who still oriented toward motion. Shu joined me just before shift change. "Do you believe in it?" she asked quietly. "The island?" I said. "Or us making it?" She didn't answer, which told me she meant both. "Belief doesn't factor anymore," I said. "Feasibility does." She nodded once. "Then start planning, like we're already gone." I watched the lights dim into night mode automatically. One more system doing its job, without knowing it might not be needed much longer. Behind the walls, winter waited, patiently. And somewhere north of the ice, the world we'd known had finished deciding without us. Leaving took longer than anyone expected. Not because we hesitated, but because hesitation had already been burned out of us. What remained was calculation, and calculation does not like shortcuts. Every action invited a shadow question. If this fails, what else fails with it? The first day was inventory, not the kind we'd done for years, slow, methodical, built around replenishment. This was extraction accounting. What could be carried? What could be trusted? What would betray us later if we lied to ourselves now? Fuel was counted 3 times by 3 different people, and still argued over afterward. Cold changed everything. Sealants that behaved at -20 failed hard at -40. Batteries lied about their charge. Lubricants thickened into something closer to hope than fluid. I stopped thinking in totals and started thinking in minutes. We pulled manuals we hadn't opened since orientation. Handwritten notes fell from their pages. Reminders from earlier crews about valves that froze first, fasteners that liked to shear under torque, sensors that drifted after extended darkness, dead hands helping living ones. One last time. Sleep came in fragments. When I did close my eyes, I kept seeing Elna's jaw, the way it locked when her face stopped being hers. I woke with my teeth clenched hard enough to hurt. Nobody talked about Tomasz anymore. Not because he was forgotten, but because saying his name felt like tempting a pattern. The survivors from the plane integrated slowly, awkwardly. They moved like people afraid of taking up space. Every clang of metal made them flinch. They volunteered for menial tasks, not because they wanted to help. but because stillness had become intolerable to them. One of them, a man named Rojas, sat with me during a long fuel transfer and talked quietly without being asked. "It didn't start loud," he said. "That's what everyone gets wrong afterward. It started like overlap, ambulances taking too long, ERs arguing with intake, people waiting because the instructions kept changing." He rubbed his hands together constantly, even when they were warm. When the biting started, they didn't call them that. They called them altercations, then incidents, then they stopped naming them at all. I didn't respond. This wasn't a story looking for reaction. It was testimony. On the second day, weather stole 12 hours from us. Wind pushed visibility down to meters. Exterior work halted. System cycling tests had to be aborted midway and restarted. People grew irritable, snapping over nothing, apologizing immediately afterward, like they were embarrassed by it. The station felt smaller again. That night, someone triggered a perimeter alarm accidentally. No breach, just a miscalibrated sensor drifting under temperature stress. Weapons were up in seconds. When we realized what it was, no one laughed. Adrenaline had started to accumulate without release, and it showed in shaking hands and short tempers. Stress without action fermented. On the third day, Shu quietly removed 2 names from the departure list, not as punishment, as mercy. One of them couldn't stop crying. The other had stopped speaking entirely and stared at nothing for hours at a time. Both had skills we needed. Neither could be trusted to make decisions under pressure anymore. They didn't argue. That hurt more than anger would have. I watched them help load equipment they would never use, methodically, professionally, like people finishing work they knew would never be checked. We ran drills inside the aircraft without powering it up. Walkthroughs, movement rehearsals, how to pass in the aisle without touching, where to brace if we skidded on ice again, how to evacuate if smoke filled the cabin and visibility dropped to 0. Every scenario ended the same way. If this happens after takeoff, we don't come back. Fuel margins allowed no second guesses. On the 4th day, the radio signal from Puerto Deseado, repeated without change. Same voice, same timing. I took comfort in its indifference. It wasn't encouraging us. It wasn't comforting us. It was simply existing. That meant someone, somewhere, was still enforcing continuity. By the time we were ready, the station looked unchanged. Lights still on, doors still sealed. But the feeling had shifted. The place had stopped pretending it was waiting for a future that included us. As we staged equipment near the hangar, a thought occurred to me that I didn't share with anyone. If we failed, the station would outlive us. If we succeeded, it would become a memory no one would maintain. That night before departure, I walked the main corridor alone, one last time. Ran my hand along a bulkhead scarred by decades of contact. Past the sealed wing where fire had scorched the air permanently. I stopped at the operations room. The consoles were dark. For the first time since arrival, there was nothing left to log. When I turned away, my reflection in the glass looked thinner, sharper, not from hunger, but from shedding a context that had held me together longer than I'd realized. Morning came without announcement. The weather window was open. The aircraft waited, patient and unforgiving. This wasn't escape. It was commitment. The fault light came on 5 minutes before we were supposed to roll. Not red, not amber. A thin white indicator blinking steadily on the auxiliary panel. Easy to miss if you weren't already looking for reasons to stop. It labeled a subsystem no one had touched since the last full-service cycle years ago. Fuel feed cross-check. I stared at it longer than necessary, waiting for it to resolve itself out of embarrassment. It didn't. "Tell me that's cosmetic," Jenna said quietly, from behind me. I shook my head. "Tell me we have time." Shu didn't say anything. She waited, which was worse. Waiting meant she trusted my judgment more than my optimism. I brought up the diagnostics. The system thought one of the secondary lines wasn't responding within tolerance. Not failed, not blocked, just slow. Cold thickened everything. We'd known that. We'd compensated for it in every other calculation. This line had been signed off as overbuilt, conservative, boring. Boring things failed last. "If it sticks," I said slowly, "the main feed compensates. We won't lose power. But burn efficiency drops. We won't know by how much until we're in the air." Silence absorbed the implication. "How much margin do we lose?" someone asked. "Depends how honest the gauges are being," I said. "Between 5 and 15%. No one spoke. 15% was the difference between touching down and circling while the math finished killing you. "Can we fix it?" Shu asked. "Yes," I said immediately, then corrected myself. "Probably, but not cleanly. We'd have to warm the line. That means partial shutdown, exposing fittings, resealing." "How long?" I checked the temperature trend and didn't like the answer. "Minimum 6 hours," I said, "if nothing snaps." The weather window was already thinning. Pressure was rising faster than forecast, the edge of the storm system creeping closer, like something patient and deliberate. If we stayed, we risked not leaving at all. If we went, we risked learning the true cost of that blinking light somewhere. There would be nowhere to land. Shu closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the decision had already passed through her. "We don't fly blind," she said. "Fix it." Nobody argued. We powered down what we could afford to lose and exposed the line. The metal burned through gloves almost immediately. Frost smoke curled and vanished as heat met cold in brief, violent compromises. The seal resisted the first attempt. The second. On the third try, the fitting screamed under torque, and everyone froze, waiting for the sound of failure to finish its sentence. It didn't. Time stretched. Hands cramped. A mistake here wouldn't be dramatic. It would be quiet and lethal hours later. When the line finally cycled cleanly, we stood back without celebrating. Diagnostics took their time coming back up, numbers drifting into place as if deciding whether to be honest. The fault light winked out. No one smiled. We watched the weather monitors instead. The window was still there, narrower now. We loaded in silence, movements crisp, rehearsed, stripped of unnecessary words. The station felt different with systems stepped down, hollowed, like a body already beginning to cool. As we rolled toward the strip, a sensor flagged movement near the outer perimeter. Not close, not threatening, just enough to register. Someone leaned toward the monitor instinctively. "What is it?" they asked. I zoomed the feed. Figures. Distant, slow, scattered, not approaching us, not reacting to sound, just present. "They didn't wander here," Rojas said softly from the jump seat. "They accumulated." That settled something in my chest I hadn't been able to name. This place wasn't being hunted. It was being waited on. We reached the end of the strip and paused as engines spooled up. Power surged, vibration rattling through the frame, every bolt and rivet asserting its own opinion about what we were about to do. I looked at the station one last time through the side window. Lights still on. No smoke, no movement. A place that had done everything it was supposed to do, right up until the future decided otherwise. Shu's voice came through the headset. "Once we're airborne," she said evenly. "We don't re-evaluate unless something actually breaks." "Understood." The plane lurched forward, ice screaming beneath us. Acceleration pressed us back, the world narrowing to speed and sound and the growing certainty that the ground wasn't letting go easily today. For one long second, I thought we'd misjudged it. Then lift took hold. The ice dropped away. The figures at the perimeter diminished into insignificance, then into texture, then into nothing at all. We climbed into cloud, instruments steady for now, fuel burn tracking within acceptable limits. Acceptable didn't mean safe. It meant possible, and possible was all we were allowed to ask for anymore. The math broke quietly. No alarms, no flashing warnings, just a number drifting where it had no business being. I recalculated twice before saying anything, changed assumptions, blamed turbulence, blamed sensor lag, blamed myself. The number didn't care. "We're not making it," I said finally. Nobody asked what I meant. Fuel flow was stable, but burn rate sat just high enough above projection to be lethal over distance. The auxiliary line fix had worked. Mechanically, aerodynamically, something else was dragging us down. Ice accumulation we couldn't fully shed, headwind stronger than reported, atmospheric density lying in ways spreadsheets never forgive. "How far short?" Shu asked. "Too far to guess our way through," I said. "We land now, controlled, or we glide later, without options." Options materialized fast when framed like that. There was one, an abandoned coastal research platform logged as inactive for nearly a month. Not designed for aircraft, but it had a hardpan strip rated for cargo drones and emergency VTOLs, fuel presence unconfirmed, structural integrity questionable. In other words, perfect. We descended through heavy cloud into visibility measured in seconds. The platform emerged late, angular shapes against darker water, lights dead, wind tearing at it like it wanted pieces. The landing was violent, not a crash. Worse, a landing that might have been a crash on a different day. The aircraft slewed sideways, skidded, found traction by accident more than design, and stopped with one wheel close enough to the edge to make no one move for several seconds. Engines down, no cheering. Everyone stayed seated until my hands stopped shaking enough to open them. She had flown the last third of the world that still existed, and it showed in the way she moved. Economical, precise, never wasting motion on reassurance she didn't believe in. She stayed in the left seat when we landed, hands resting on controls that vibrated faintly under wind load, listening to the platform through the aircraft like it was a living thing. "We don't linger," she said over the intercom as the engine spun down. "You fuel. I watch the weather and the gauges. If I say go, we go. Even if you're mid-hose." No one challenged her. She'd already proven she knew when flight time turned into death. We hit the deck running. Shu took point with the cover team. Rifle already up, posture squared to the empty steel. I broke right with Jenna toward the pump housing. The objective wasn't exploration. It was a straight line between metal that held fuel and metal that burned it. The platform smelled of oil, rust, and trapped air. The pump housing door gave reluctantly, metal shrieking once before the hinges surrendered. Inside, the machinery sat dull and cold, gauges fogged but intact. The tanks outside loomed massive and silent, their skins scarred by salt and neglect. "Gravity feed," Jenna said, already moving. "We don't have time to wake the whole system." "Do it," I said. She cracked the valve. The pipe rang hollow, then complained, a low groan rolling through the steel like something old and unwilling being forced back to work. Air coughed through the line. Then came the sound we needed, liquid moving with purpose. "Flow confirmed," Jenna said. "Pressure's building." From the aircraft, Maria's voice came sharp and controlled. "I've got green on intake. It's dirty, but it's fuel." Shu repositioned the perimeter immediately. No wandering arcs, no blind angles. Overlapping fields of fire pointed outward, every approach vector covered. We stood open and visible, daring the platform to show us what it still held. It didn't at first. The wind whipped between catwalks. The sea slammed below. Containers sat half open like mouths that had finished speaking. Then something shifted. A figure detached itself from the shadow of a cargo crate, movement slow enough to almost register as imagination. It straightened with mechanical patience, joints aligning piece by piece. Its head turned, not toward us exactly, but toward the sound, toward the pump. "I've got one," I said quietly. "Not fast." "Hold," Shu replied. More shapes followed, not rushing, not stalking, just accumulating. They emerged from places people had once chosen to wait, beside doors, under stairs, pressed into corners where wind had been cut down to survivable speeds. Their skin was grayed and split, lips drawn back where cold had chewed them raw. No blood, no fresh kills. These weren't hunters. They were leftovers. The first crossed 30 meters. I fired once. The shot cracked through skull and echo, the infected folding immediately, body collapsing into something that barely resembled balance anymore. It didn't fall like a person. It unraveled. The others did not react. They kept coming. The noise will pull more, Maria said over the intercom. No panic, just data. I've got wind picking up. You have 6 minutes before it starts complicating lift. How's fuel? Shu asked. Still climbing, Maria replied. Slow, but steady. Shots came rhythmically now. No bursts, no wasted rounds. Each infected that closed inside effective range was dropped cleanly, bodies falling where they stood or sliding off the deck into black water below. One got closer than it should have. A woman in a maintenance jacket lurched forward, mouth opening wider than anatomy suggested it should. Her leg dragged uselessly, but her arms were strong, hands clawing at air with intent that hadn't decayed with the rest of her. She reached Jenna just as the pressure gauge spiked. I fired reflexively. The round took her shoulder clean off, spinning her sideways. She hit the deck hard, still reaching with the arm she had left, jaw snapping at nothing. Shu stepped in and ended it with a controlled shot through the temple. 3 minutes, Jenna said, voice tight but steady. We're above minimum plus maybe a hair. Maria, Shu called. 2 minutes from marginal wind shift, the pilot answered. Any longer, and I can't promise. Climb. Cut it at 4, Shu said. We don't negotiate with weather. The infected kept coming. Not faster, not smarter, just persistent. A line of intent that didn't care how many bodies it took to advance a few meters. At 4 minutes exactly, Jenna shut the valve. Residual fuel sprayed cold across the deck as the hose disengaged, droplets freezing mid-air before hitting steel. We backed away in locked step, rifle steady, never breaking formation. One infected made it inside arm's reach. Its fingers brushed fabric. Maria's voice snapped through the intercom. Now. The last shot dropped it inches from the ramp. We boarded in order. Hatch up. Seal engaged. Engines roared back to life under Maria's hands, turbines screaming as the aircraft clawed for speed. The platform fell away beneath us, revealing more movement than we'd seen from the deck. Figures rising from dormancy, drawn together too late to matter. From above, it looked like the place exhaling. Maria didn't look back. Fuel gauges stabilized just above the line, where hope turned into physics. No more stops, she said into the quiet cabin. This gets us there, or it gets us dead. Either way, it's the last math we do. No one argued. We'd stolen distance from a place that no longer understood what distance meant, and the island signal was still repeating. Steady, waiting. They didn't let us descend at first. Maria held altitude while the island slid beneath us in slow, deliberate circles. From above it looked almost peaceful, a dark mass ringed by white surf, lights placed sparingly and with intent rather than comfort. No sprawl, no spastic illumination, just enough to see, and no more. That's discipline, Maria said quietly. Someone thought about angles. The radio came alive exactly on schedule. The same voice we'd been listening to for days, now finally speaking to us instead of past us. Unidentified aircraft, maintain holding pattern, do not descend further, acknowledge. Maria keyed the mic. She didn't add emotion, didn't add story. Puerto Deseado Auxiliary. This is civilian aircraft inbound from south. We are low fuel but stable. No known active infections aboard. Request landing clearance. Silence followed. Not dead air. Considered air. I imagined people on the ground doing the same math we'd done over and over, weighing probability against consequence, deciding how many unknowns were acceptable before you stopped calling it survival and started calling it charity. Finally, transmit crew manifest, medical status, time since last potential exposure. We answered everything. Honestly. Every bite, every termination, every sealed corridor and burned room. No omissions, no attempts to sound clean. This place didn't sound like it rewarded cleanliness. It sounded like it rewarded truth. Maintain pattern, the voice said. We are preparing ground procedure. Maria leaned back slightly when the channel went quiet again. That's good, she murmured. If they were going to tell us to leave, they'd have done it already. Below us, I could see movement that wasn't random. Vehicles repositioning, floodlights adjusting their arc, a runway emerging only when they wanted us to see it. They weren't hiding. They were controlling. Fuel crept down toward numbers I stopped reading in decimals. When the aircraft shuddered slightly under a gust, I felt my jaw tighten without realizing it. Maria noticed. We're fine, she said, not looking away from the instruments. But they need to hurry. The radio cracked again. Inbound aircraft, begin descent on assigned vector. You will shut down engines on the runway and remain seated. Any attempt to exit without instruction will be treated as hostile. No one flinched at the word. Hostile was just another way of saying irreversible now. They did not rush us, but they did not hesitate either. Maria brought the aircraft down exactly where she was told, following lights that seemed to exist solely for us, switched on only after our shadow passed over them. When the wheels touched, the sound felt different from Antarctica, not sharper or softer, just alive. The runway flexed slightly beneath the weight instead of resisting it. She cut the engines and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the controls. I don't hear anything wrong, she said quietly. No one answered. The silence this time didn't feel like threat. It felt like allowance. We stayed seated while people approached. They kept their distance, but not out of fear, out of habit. Layered protection, practiced movements, eyes alert, but not frantic. When they spoke, it was to instruct, not to warn. I realized I hadn't heard that tone in weeks. Shu was the first to stand when they gave the signal. She didn't assert authority. She didn't look to be recognized. She simply rose like someone used to, being the first to absorb uncertainty so others didn't have to. She spoke calmly, answered questions cleanly, didn't minimize what we'd brought with us, and didn't dramatize it either. Bites, terminations, sealed wings, burned rooms. She took responsibility without apology. I watched the people listening to her. Their shoulders didn't tense. That mattered. We were escorted off the aircraft slowly, one at a time. No raised voices, no shouted commands, just hands indicating where to walk, where to pause. The ground under my boots was damp, not frozen. The air smelled faintly green, sharp and unfamiliar enough to sting my eyes. Someone behind me inhaled too fast and laughed quietly at themselves. "Careful," one of the island staff said almost gently. "That gets people." They brought us to a long, low structure facing the water. Quarantine, technically, but not like what we'd imagined. Windows, warm light, space enough to breathe without bumping into your own thoughts. When the doors closed, they did so with an ordinary sound, not a lock snapping shut, just a door. For the first time since the plane arrived in Antarctica, no one stood guard over us with a weapon. Shu sat down on the edge of a bench and removed her gloves carefully, flexing her fingers as if noticing them properly for the first time in days. "Well," she said after a while, "we did it." No one cheered, but people sat down where they stood. That, I realized, was relief. Later, hours or maybe a lifetime afterward, a woman from the island's leadership came in alone. No armor, no escort visible. "You'll stay here for 3 days," she said. "We'll watch for progression. We don't expect any, but expectation doesn't keep people alive." Sue nodded. "Understood." "If there's no change," the woman continued, "we integrate you, not as guests, as work." Shu smiled then, just faintly. "That's all we've been looking for," she said. I found her standing outside at dusk the next day, facing the water. The sun hung low, copper and stubborn, refusing to dip completely below the horizon. "Thought you'd be inside," I said. "Antarctica taught me never to waste good weather," she replied. We watched the waves break against the rocks. Rhythmic, predictable, the kind of motion that had been happening long before us and would continue regardless of what we'd lost. "They needed someone to coordinate shoreline power," she said. "I volunteered you." I laughed quietly. The sound surprised both of us. "Figures," I said. She grew more serious after that. "I want you to understand something," she said. "This worked because people didn't try to be exceptional. They followed systems. They trusted each other when it mattered. And when it didn't?" She shrugged. "Then we survived the consequences." We stood there until the light changed. On the third morning, the radio repeated its message. Same cadence, same calm delivery. But this time, it wasn't meant for us. It was meant for whoever was still out there. "We are receiving limited arrivals," it said. "We are stable. If you are hearing this, do not rush." I watched Shu listen to it, arms folded, expression unreadable. "That signal saved us," I said. She shook her head. "No, it told us where to walk. We did the rest." Maria was cleared to fly again within the week. Not to roam, just to move supplies between islands that still answered, routes plotted carefully so distance remained a tool rather than a gamble. On her first takeoff from the island, she circled once, just enough to see the place whole. She said it reminded her that landing didn't have to be the end of motion. That night, as the lights stayed on, and the generators carried the load without complaint, I slept without dreaming, for the first time in months. Outside the perimeter, the dead remained. Inside it, people planned for next week. Not forever, just next week. And for now, after everything, that was hope enough.